All right, let's get into our next discussion now. The increasing rate of commercial banks borrowing from the Central Bank of Nigeria is becoming a source of concern to many.
Absolutely. Now, between 2016 and 2017, borrowings by deposit money banks increased by 80%, from 29 trillion naira to 52 trillion naira. Now, while banks borrowing from the CBN alarmingly increased, their deposits with the Apex Bank reduced drastically.
Now, financial analysts say the development was triggered by the high interest rate regime, which made the CBN standing lending facility the cheapest source of borrowing for banks, and the standing deposit facility unattractive for deposit placement for the DMBs.
But the high rate of borrowing by banks from their regulator has given rise to speculations that commercial banks might be facing serious liquidity problems and that the weaker banks might become insolvent. Not again, many will be saying right now. All right, with us in the studio is a financial analyst, BC Iyaniwura. Good morning to you, and thank you for joining us.
Good morning.
And then, of course, joining us from our Abuja studio is an economist, Professor Ken Ife. Good morning to you, Professor. Can you hear me, Professor? We need to confirm your audio.
Okay.
Okay, thank you for joining us. All right.
Okay, I can hear you now.
Okay, yeah. First off, the liquidity pressures on commercial banks. Are we at a troubling period right now? Should Nigerians be worried?
I think it's getting to a very dangerous level, to be honest. The CBN, as you saw, gave a credit of about 27.49 trillion in 6 months. And so many indicators are pointing to a potential crisis. Although you can see some of the origins, in some respect, people may say, well, the TSA reduced liquidity of the banks, but so what? This is armchair banking. Then, of course, you see the capital adequacy ratios declining in many of the banks. The limits are 10% for regional and national banks and 15% for international banks. And you'll find them falling short. The average came out at about 11 point something. We also have issues about the non-performing loans, which usually should be set around 5%, but you've seen them rocking as high as 15%. So all the indicators about crisis are there, staring on everybody's face. You know, but we know that we could do better than we are doing at the moment. And we have 22 banks or 21, and it's only 4 that are at the melting point. And they have options. They have options. They should exercise those options. Go to the market and they go to the capital market, or go into some major arrangements to boost, to boost liquidity. So they can't just sit back and precipitate crisis of unmitigated proportion.
Okay, let me bring you in here, BC. We remember when so many banks went down sometime in Nigeria. A lot of people lost their monies and so on. Although some checks have been put in place by government one way or the other, that even if a bank is going down, not so many persons are going to lose money the way it was at that time. But no one's going to be happy that the bank I used to save my money went down, as the case may be. But looking at it in critical and in the economic term of it, are Nigerian banks going broke to the level where some banks may be going down?
I agree entirely with Prof. The indices are very scary. It is very scary. That's the truth of it. And luckily, the CBN late last year actually told banks not to pay dividends until you meet some criteria. That should tell anybody who is a player in the financial sector that there is fire on the mountain, and that you also have a kind of fire in the borehole. You understand? You always say that's the thing. It is actually very scary, and I think some of the problem is mismatch of regulation. We cannot afford that. Also, government policies has been very inconsistent, and as it is eating other sectors, the banks are also feeling it. The TSA, the sudden increase in fuel price took a lot of money out of the system. Increase in taxes And that is what we are seeing now. You see, the government is becoming richer. The government is borrowing more money from the CBN, whereas the sector, the private sector, which ought to provide the liquidity, is being denied funds. So the multiplier effect of the money available is not being felt in the system. That's just it. Now, going directly to your question, yeah, we want to look at what's brought about the AMCON, all these regulatory agencies. Yes, the banks ran into problem. The non-performing loans were very huge. Unfortunately, we are back to that again, because the non-performing loans you have now are beyond statutory threshold, which shows that the CBN and the AMCON and the whatever it is have not been doing what they are meant to do. They've been negligent, they've been reckless, they've been sleeping. Now, if they are not performing, the question is, whose money is it? Don't forget that there is a maximum amount of money you can get as a depositor when the bank gets bust. Does that remedy somebody who has 20 million naira in an account? Now you find out that that's one of the things that is putting pressure on the dollar. A lot of people are moving their money out of the banking system. That's just the truth of it. A lot of Nigerians now are keeping their money in dollars, foreign exchange, and other convertible instruments. And a reasonable government, quote and unquote, should think and say what is happening. If there are no money in the banking system, there can be no investment. If there are no investment, there can be no employment. If there are no employment, it's a cycle. So we really need to pinpoint what the problem is. Monetary, physical angle of the two sides of the coin must align and work together. Actually, the indices are very scary. That's the truth of it.
Okay, Prof, let me come back to you now. What kind of policies should the government be looking into, at least to regularize the different policies put in place? You heard BC talking about some of the policies working against one another, exactly, and then the banks are at the receiving end, and ultimately Nigerians.
Well, we always love to hate the government in everything. But don't forget that the CBN has prudential guidelines, and the issue is compliance with the prudential guidelines. The risk management in many of these banks have just failed. It's true that, but it is the banking sector that is the CBN and the ND that are actually detecting the poor compliance. Now, let us come back to brass task. The banks ought to live up to their responsibility. We appreciate that they have brought over $150 billion into the economy. Nobody doubts that since 2005. But you have to look at how many branches do you need to keep? How much could you use technology to develop online products? It's not about having as many branches as possible. Even the foreign branches, I think Diamond Bank is closing their foreign branches because of the cost. There are costs. Then you go and take your money and put it to treasury, government treasury bills, and then earn 15 to 22% and sit back. The money is no longer working for you. You're just waiting to. What are you actually doing? Banks do well when businesses do well. You don't lend to MSMEs. We saw one report from IFC in 2008 that showed that of the lending from the banking sector to the MSMEs was only 7.5%. And then when they measured again in 2012, it melted completely to 0.4. If you don't lend to this sector of about 47 million businesses employing 90% of our workforce, who are you lending to? Now, basic economics will tell you, you spread your risk, but you over-concentrate your risk on the oil sector. And then over 30% of your non-performing loans are coming from that. Who do you think you are? Okay, every branch, I lived in UK for over 40 years. Every branch of these banks should have a trained business advisor so that they do outreach. And then you develop products. Banks should have character. You can see Fidelity Bank moving into export and MSME. Banks should move into particular sectors, 1 or 2 sectors per bank, and develop financial products. Train all these girls who are making redundant because they can't get you more deposits. Train them as business advisors. They go out and nurture businesses and develop products and grow the economy. When the businesses do well, you do well as a bank. And not to expect to do well when all the businesses are going bankrupt. I mean, we have to face the fact.
Sorry. All right. Now, okay.
I would expect that CBN at some stage could lower the cash reserve ratio temporarily. I would also expect that the government could review some of the policy that are scaring people away from putting their money in the bank, because if you don't encourage people to bring their money back into the, more money are outside the banking sector than within the banking sector. Some people would say, well, the government is scaremongering us, so they are taking their money out and keeping them away outside the banking system.
All right,
because
Prof.
you know, you're going to increase the threshold at which you start investigating money.
Okay, we'll come back to you on that. Basically, you were itching to say something.
Why I agreeing virtually with Prof, I disagree with him in respect of the impact of regulation.
Okay.
In the instance, one, agree there are prudential guidelines. The question is, how effective are the regulators in enforcing these prudential guidelines? There are a lot of abuses inside the banking industry. Both abuses, management abuses, giving themselves loans, buying and selling assets to themselves. What has the regulations done? Also, on the government side, the CBN is allowing the bank to play too much in the government window. Treasury bills. If you can lend at gilt rate to the government that you know can never default, why do you want to lend to the outside world? So that is why I'm saying the regulatory agencies, the physical and monetary part of it, need to actually work together. I'm a businessman, the banks are business people. If they can lend to the government at 16%, why should they lend to you at 29% when they know the likelihood of default from your part is 90%, while that of the government is the reverse, 100%. They are in business to make money. That's one aspect of it. The second aspect of it is this. We actually need, the banking industry everywhere in the world is an highly regulated industry. You remember what happened after the collapse of the banking industry globally. The US government and the European government actually brought in a lot of regulations, which they still stand by. But we have been reckless and negligent in enforcing our own regulation. There's no doubt about it. How many banks board has the CBN collapsed in the last 3 years? None. And you cannot tell me that this bank that's having problems doesn't have management issues. They do have management issues. You cannot tell me they don't have shareholders issues. They do have shareholders issues. But if you say you want to protect the bank or one particular bank, you are putting the whole of the system in possible jeopardy. That is why the earlier we isolate banks that have problems, the better, so that the cancer does not spread. You know, banks play within themselves. You have the normal overnight lending market. They take money and fund for. So if one is a lend giver and the other is a lend taker, and the lend taker suddenly defaults, it's going to run.
So what should the CBN be doing now? Because it's quite scary, the analysis you just made, really. Yeah. So what should be the focus of the CBN now? So we, first of all, like you said, isolate the banks.
Yes, definitely.
What should they
Luckily, the CBN has taken the first step. Most banks, you will find out that they've been paying dividends from borrowed funds, which is against the law.
Wow.
Yes, because if you are not making profit, you are not supposed to pay dividends. So you find out that this year, a lot of banks are not going to pay dividends. A plus for the CBN. And that should tell us there is a problem. Because they've been borrowing. If you look at the SLF, you find out that most of the borrowings are around December and January. What the banks do is to borrow money to make up their financial position, because the year ending for their audit is December. So they borrow money from the CBN. That's even a fraud. And the CBN cannot tell me.
Should the CBN be allowing that?
That's what I'm saying. The CBN cannot tell me. It doesn't know. Because most of the time, Decembers are shut down periods for the economy. Industries are not working. Offices are closed. So why should the borrowing from the deposit bank be highest at about that time? So the CBN ought to have seen.
Asked.
Yes, the CBN should have seen the red flag. Why is it that it is in December that they are borrowing so much?
All right, Professor Ife, let me bring you in here. We remember in the days of Charles Soludo as governor of the central bank, where he brought about the issue of recapitalization of banks, and that brought them up to a great extent. Is it time to recapitalize banks now and then maybe go into mergers outrightly for banks?
You know, when Soludo did that recapitalization after going to South Africa and finding out that one bank there is more than the 89 banks in capital, but then he actually gave incentive. Once they got the 25 billion mark, he gave them incentive. If you can go up to 100 billion, we'll give you $500 million of our foreign reserve dollar to manage. So that was carrot and stick. So he used that to push some banks. But I think we'll need to use another one to force some to go to recapitalization. If they are failing, and part of it is, the main case is liquidity, they should recapitalize. If they're not recapitalizing, then they should submit to some kind of merger or takeover. So that could be another trance that of recapitalization. They should go to the market. And I'm glad that the CBN is stopping the payment of dividend when you are making losses. It's incredible. But I also have to say that Christmas is in December. People spend money that they don't have in December. So the banks have to respond. So I'm not surprised that there's a peak of activity in that period. But there's a lot more the banks can do to actually create business for themselves. And it's not happening. If you are starving a sector that accounts for 90% of your economy, starving them completely. Look at agriculture. With the success you are having in agriculture, you still find banks regarding it as risk averse. And the NISAL is giving, is guaranteeing 80% of the, you still find commercial banks reluctant to engage. You're going to build your future. The future will not build you. You build the future. And then you create products and have a sustainable banking practice. And not jump at one or two opportunities that are not sustainable. Today is TSA, tomorrow is Treasury bill, the other day, I don't understand. They can do better.
All right, BC, can we say it's because maybe some of these banks were so used to political deposits that they became lax in their operations, and now the TSA is putting them in a lot of
No, it is actually
crisis.
beyond TSA. That's not the truth of it. We've never had banking in the real sense of it. In this country, I think the last banking we had was in the 1960s.
Wow.
What we've been
That
having,
is a strong statement.
No, that's just the truth of it.
Wow.
Number one, why don't we have banking? There has not been long-term funds. The pension fund now is trying to come up. But you also want to find out that law and regulations, because the government actually knows what the market is, restricts the ability of the pension fund managers on what they can play with, which is absolutely because you don't want to work for 40 years and you get out and somebody tell you your pension is missing. So that's just the truth of it. But aside from that, the corruption in the banking system is awesome, believe you me. The stealing, the theft, everything going on in the banking industry, you don't want to know about it. And it is high time that the government must beam its light on that sector. Because if the financial sector, which is the backbone, it's an intermediary sector, it's supposed to take from the surplus and channel to the less surplus, to the needy. So if that bridge collapses, the ability of funds to move from one to the other is totally diminished. So the government must actually focus. It's awesome. We've not had banking. That's just the truth of it.
So that's why they always be lopsided development.
Yes, you see, in the last 20 years, we've had marketers playing more role in the banking industry than those in the operations department. What does that tell you? They are marketing products. Those who are in banking, who should be developing banking, are not doing banking. There are no banking products. Just like he said, when I was growing up, you see banks come to the office and say, what do you do for your business? Oh, how can we assist you?
In fact, many Nigerians don't know they're supposed to have bank managers.
Yes, even investor advisors. Investors advisors, you go to the UK, if you open an account with Nat Bank or anything, they will tell you, oh, this is an investment advisor. What do you, not even account officer, investment advisor.
Too.
What do you do for a living? Oh, you're into farming. Oh, do you know that the CBN has these facilities, these windows for farmers? Oh, you don't know. In case you need, okay, can we come and visit your farm?
But I wonder why the banks here are not taking advantage. It's part of what Professor has said earlier on. No, but the point there is you can bond with someone, grow with the person's business, even for life.
No, because I told you we are not doing banking. That's the truth of it. Then also the government policies may not be encouraging. Like I told you, we don't have long-term funds.
Okay, we have to leave you here now. BC Yanowura, the financial analyst, thank you very much for coming on the program. And Professor Kenny Fair, thank you so much for joining us from our Abuja studio. Thanks for your insight on this. Okay. All right, this is where we have to close the door on our discussions right now. Thank you very much for spending your morning with us.